basically I spent a lot of time supervising students in a very small, intimate gathering, telling them about herbs and how to use them. So this is the biggest crowd I've ever had to talk to. So forgive me if I choke and tell me if you can't hear me. So green tea is used in Chinese medicine. It's not one of the main herbs that we talk about a whole lot. There are several representative formulas that they do use it in. I'll talk about that in a minute. It appears in a couple of classic texts. One of them is the Shannon Ben Sao Jing, the Divine Husbandman's Classic Materia Medica. And my Chinese isn't very accurate with tones, so if somebody pronounces it differently, don't be surprised. The interesting thing about the Divine Husband's Classic Materia Medica was it was written in approximately 300 before Common Era to 200 AD. That was the era of the dynasty that it came from. And Shen Nong was this famous classical emperor who may or may not have existed. But apparently the book that they wrote, they talk about how he had discovered 365 herbs, an herb for each day of the year, and then gone out individually and tasted each one and written them down. Since the book was written hundreds of years after they had already been using these herbs, but it's very likely, and some records show that this emperor was actually representative of the cultural knowledge of an entire group of people who were called the Shennong. So the emperor himself was probably an entire group of people who were out tasting things. And China has very little arable land. It's much like Norway. Only 30% of the land you can actually grow things on. And there's a lot of people there. So they're very invested in finding things to eat. So they have tasted many things that we would never think to taste. Centipedes, scorpions, all sorts of unusual things. And some of those they found weren't necessarily edible, but they had other effects that were helpful and good for longevity or ameliorated certain conditions. But green tea is fortunately one of those ones that they added to their daily life, and they drink a lot of green tea in little cups like this, mostly all day long, where they carry around a thermos and they add water to it all day long. And as one of my professors used to say, you put some tea in the bottom of your cup, pour in some hot water, and it's too strong in the morning, and you pour some more hot water in the afternoon, it's just right, and then you have some more in the afternoon, it's too weak. So they do drink it constantly. So when you look at a lot of the studies where they talk about a lot of the studies on green tea and health are outcome studies. They've taken a population of a group of people and compared their tea drinking within that population. For example, 8,000 people in one city in Japan, and then they do studies at 9 years out to see what the results are, of how the health of the people is dependent on their reported tea drinking 9 years earlier. And they found that when they've done this, that the populations that drank more tea, and it's usually something like 10 glasses, which sounds like a lot of tea a day, that the populations that drank more tea tended to have less cancer, less diabetes, less high blood pressure, and various other ailments. And it's not that, and so they're populations that eat a very similar diet, so it's usually they talk about that somewhat. So something in the tea is doing something, and a lot of tea manufacturers and various groups that spend a lot of money trying to find out what exactly that is so they can market it. But there's a lot of things in green tea that are very beneficial. So one way the Chinese always view things is by looking at your whole system and what you're doing every day and what can be healthy for you to do on a long-term basis. It's not the quick fix of a pill or an operation sometimes. It's about a lot of the Chinese medicine is involved with longevity and balance and feeling the best you can feel given your age and food and the nature of the climate and the seasons. So, green tea in Chinese medicine, they usually classify herbs by its taste, its action, what channels it enters, because they always talk about acupuncture channels and organ dysfunction. And green tea is supposed to be bittersweet and cool. Now normally when we think of tea, we think of it as being hot because it comes in hot water. But it's one of the herbs that they use for dehydration in the summer and heat frustration. So its cool and bitter nature helps with that. It also has quite a few minerals in it. So if you're dehydrated, you're not only losing water, and the water in tea would help, but there's also some minerals and vitamin C in green tea that help, bring your electrolytes back to a somewhat normal fashion. So some of the uses of tea that they talk about in medicated diet books like this one, and there's a whole group of Chinese medicine that just has to do with preparing certain dishes at certain times of the years for certain conditions. And some of the recipes are hysterical. They add a lot of interesting herbs to things, and the preparations are involved. So they use green tea on a daily basis, also because it promotes digestion. I don't know if you've ever gone out to Chinese food and it seemed really greasy, and then you had some tea and that greasy feeling in your mouth goes away. Anyway, that's one of the uses of it, and apparently it works in the body like that as well, which is one of the reasons it helps with cholesterol, probably, is something in it is helping break that down. It's used also for headache. So sometimes people get headaches because of caffeine withdrawal. So it would definitely help with that because it is low in caffeine compared to coffee and black tea, but there still is some there. The most common formula it's used for in Chinese medicine is a formula called Chong Chong Chai Tao San. And that formula is for headaches, especially when you have an early onset of a cold. So I don't know if you've ever had a cold where your neck really hurts and you feel chilled. And about 3 years ago, there was a cold going around, and everybody had this cold. And like they bend over and their head would hurt and have a horrible headache. So that would be a classic presentation of when you would do this formula. And the formula has mint, green tea, and 5 other herbs in it that have long Latin names you've probably never heard of. But if you're interested in it, I have that information. And many of those herbs are hot, so the tea and the mint are cooling in nature, so they help balance the formula so you don't get overheated. And tea is supposed to help with headaches, both because of its blood dilating caffeine properties, but also because of how it's used in Chinese medicine. The other classic book where they talk a lot about tea is called Sha Jing, which is a classic of tea written during the Tang Dynasty. And that one goes into extremely great detail about how you prepare it, what tools you use, the ritual, and it has a list of instruments and all these things like that. And it's written in scroll form, so each chapter has these big characters about how you use tea. That's only 600, 900 Common Era, so not that old really, only a couple thousand years old. So green tea is often combined with other things and is given as sort of a light refreshing thing. And for people who are doing a lot of drugs, you can do green tea along with some other herbs, and they're very safe to use. One of them we use is green tea combined with chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum, I don't know if you've had chrysanthemum tea or not before, but it's fairly common in Asia. I'm always somewhat surprised to see that it's not available in stores here when I go to the store. I don't know why. But both green tea and chrysanthemum flowers, which we call junhua, go to the liver and are cooling, and it's used for things like red eyes. So people who have hypertension with red eyes, it's something that they can take, and it's very gentle on your system. You can take it long term. And there are a few other formulas where they recommend combining it with green tea sometimes, but that's the main one we use is for the headaches. I don't know what other questions anybody might have. So, yeah.
I've never used chrysanthemum. I'd like to know some more what it's good for, but I do see it on a regular basis when I'm in the Oriental markets, like Guangdong or Hubei or Wanjamai. They have shelves of it.
Yes. There's a white chrysanthemum and yellow chrysanthemum. You can take like 3 or 4 flowers and put them in a hot water over it and drink it like that. But it's cooling, goes to the liver in Chinese medicine, and it's for things like red eyes.
Does it help restore liver function
Um,
or anything? What if you don't have red eyes, would you still use chrysanthemum?
you could still use chrysanthemum.
It's great for hypertension.
Hypertension,
Especially
yeah,
lower blood
that's
pressure.
hypertension with green tea, sometimes combined. So. Well, a lot of the things that you see in Chinese medicine, some are very strong and more like drugs, and some are very gentle, like green tea, chrysanthemum, the ever popular goji berries that you see all over the stores now. They're like, they're like Chinese blueberries, so yeah, they're good for you, but they're not and they're sort of a superfood because they combine, they're what you call a functional food. So they're nutritious and they have things that help prevent things. It's not going to cure you of something necessarily, but it's part of a healthy lifestyle and healthy habits that you can have to keep yourself functioning well. So, a lot of things we do are not so healthy habits, like drinking and smoking and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily going to counteract the effects of that, but it can be helpful when you're trying to do more things like exercise and get enough sleep and things like that. Interestingly, although one of the first myth I ever heard about the origin of tea was somebody was trying to meditate, some monk of some variety, and he couldn't meditate and kept falling asleep, and he got so frustrated he ripped off his eyebrows and threw them down, and a tea plant grew up. I've read about it once and I've never seen it anywhere else. So even though tea is good for keeping you awake, it also has amino acid, I think, in it. Not L-tryptophan, it's something longer.
Theanine. L-theanine.
L-theanine in it, and that is indicated for, it's been extracted and used in some naturopathic medicine to help people sleep at night. So there's some interesting things, the properties of it. So it's not only the caffeine that keeps it, the low caffeine that keeps it from being too stimulating, it's also there's some ingredients in it that are probably helping you from feeling like you've drained all your energy out.
Are you taking more questions?
Yeah.
I don't want to hog the floor. Is there anybody else? Do I have questions? You mentioned goji berries, and I bought some at Ardung, and I noticed they're all dried up, shriveled up little berries.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a healthy form. That when you chew on it, it just gets stuck in your teeth. They're very gummy. Would it be wise to put it in the tea and let them soak in there? And in that case, would it be more
Yeah, that's a
would
common,
it digest better?
that's a common formula that we do for people is goji berries with chrysanthemum and things like green tea, and then you put them in hot water. Almost all the herbs in China are cooked. They don't eat raw foods very often in China. One, if you've seen some of the hygiene in China, you would realize why that was not a healthy decision. But also the process of cooking foods makes things more digestible to us. Our ancestors did a fair amount of cooking the last 10,000 years or so. And many things combine together and interact with each other in the heat. Right? They change slightly chemically. Things become more available to be digested and easier to digest. So usually what I have people do when they have goji berries is not take them in tea so often, but when you make oatmeal in the morning, just mix those in. When you're cooking the oatmeal, they plump up like raisins and they become more palatable and I think easier to digest. So oftentimes when people start taking Chinese herbs, it's a little bit of a shock to their systems because their bodies haven't encountered these substances before, so the body kind of goes, huh, what's this? Okay, so people often have, that's the most common side effect of new things is some digestive upset. Usually that goes away pretty quickly once your body gets more acclimatized to it. If you've ever gone traveling and had digestive upset and then it, when you get there and then it stops, that's sort of what your body does. You do have your own intelligence system here that's separate from that. So even though your brain's going, this is just like home, your body's like, I don't know. Let me think about that. This is stressful and new. So in general, things tend to, I prefer people to cook things because it makes it easier to deal with. So. Raw diet food people and vegans aren't a big deal, aren't a big thing in Chinese medicine. They tend to eat meat and lots of varieties of fruits and vegetables, and not so much rice, surprisingly. So. And a lot of tea. So that's the basis of their diet, and that's what they've evolved with for hundreds of years.
They don't eat a lot of rice. What are some carbs that they do eat?
It depends on what region of China you're in. So in the north, they eat more wheat noodles. But rice tends to be the filler that you eat after your meal, because the first thing you appreciate is, the good vegetables and the preparation. Because a lot of Chinese meals, they're cut up in a certain way and they're cooked in a certain way. And it can be almost ritualized sometimes. So usually they eat the meat and then the rice is a filler afterwards. So when you go there and you say, I like some rice with my food, they look at you like, what? Why? Didn't we just give you food? Why do you want rice to fill up on? So it's a little bit of a culture shock. Yes?
Oh, I don't know how before. As I look in supermarkets, health food stores, Asian markets, I see a lot of boxes of tea, and
Yes.
they're usually green tea. And the prices range from 99 cents up to $10, $12, and there's one place that you buy it by the ounce in a Chinese store where the tea is from floor to ceiling in bins. How do we as consumers know what to buy? Are there differences? If you get a more expensive tea, does that mean it has more of the properties? If it's from China, is it sprayed? Is that something we should be aware of, pesticides? How would we be smart consumers in terms of purchasing our green tea?
Yeah, we usually drink really cheap green tea. Much like wine and coffee recently in Portland, tea has always had this cachet of the more expensive, the better. And it really is, it's pretty much what you like. Green tea is processed in a certain way where it is dried and not oxidized fairly quickly. And some teas are more oxidized. Teas like coffees that come from high altitudes are harder to get and harder to transport, so those tend to be more expensive. So part of it is the preparation methods can make things more expensive. They usually just pick the tips off the tea, and the tips are more expensive than the leaves, and they're supposed to be better for you in some ways, and less astringent tasting probably, because older leaves tend to have more chemicals in them and whatnot that the plant naturally has. Just like if you've ever eaten dandelion, and you pick some dandelion before it's flowered and you taste the same dandelion after it's flowered, there's a distinct difference in the taste. It becomes a lot stronger. Or kale this time of year is kind of bold and tough and things like that. So that's really the difference is it's a matter of taste, so how important something is. The variety of tea can have a fairly high range of caffeine differences in it. So some teas have a lot less caffeine, some have more. I'm not sure how you would figure that out unless it's said on the label somehow. Some tea comes from heritage sites, like the tea I picked from here comes from 300-year-old trees. So tea is actually a tree that's really big. They prune it down to little tiny size. And that probably is slightly different, but it's kind of like, what kind of apple do you like? So it's more about what you like probably than the cachet of a certain type of tea. So in Japan, where they did a lot of these studies, they do this powdered green tea that they mix with water. I have no idea how it's processed in an unusual way, and I have no idea where they get the tea from. And tea is grown in a fair wide range of areas. So
Can I interject something? It's
Yeah.
tea month. So there's actually a whole calendar of events, most of them free, that address these, and you probably will find some events that will answer that particular question. Yeah. The people at the Dow probably can alert you to what's on the agenda. They're doing a bunch of stuff, but there are tea schools in Portland that are doing demonstrations, and there are other tea businesses that are doing demonstrations in all different parts of Portland, so.
Yeah, the Dow Tea, the man who owns the Dow Tea does a lot of research and importation and goes to the various plantations, looks at them and does adjustments and things like that. I don't know that many pesticides and sprays being used on tea in general.
They do.
They do?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there are organic, there are certified.
Yeah, there are certified organic varieties, so even in China. I don't know if anybody has any other questions, or I've bored you with tea already, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we should like getting more tea from the dispenser over there to
She said
inspire.
10 glasses a day, that's 80 ounces of tea. You mean baby cups that
Little
are
baby
just
cups.
like 3 ounces?
3 or 4 ounces probably is what they're actually drinking. That's a lot of tea. There's information up here if you want to look at various herbs. Well, this is chrysanthemum I was talking about.